It's my third novel, and it came out last year in hardback, and it came out in paperback. Well, it had the historic misfortune to come out in paperback at the beginning of March, at which point everyone stopped going to shops, and and I couldn't do any events and do anything about it. But it's nice to be able to talk about it again, finally. Plume is a sort of dark novel about London, and quite specifically East London, where I've lived for almost 20 years now. I felt that it's a novel about two men who both have a kind of unfortunate relationship with the truth. One is an alcoholic journalist who fears any moment that his large back catalogue of falsehoods and plagiarism is about to be exposed. And the other is a reclusive cult novelist who, it turns out, has conducted a fairly extensive literary fraud, which is what's revealed in the book. He invented he wrote a very popular non-fiction book, a memoir about the experience of being mugged. And it emerges in the early parts of this novel that he has in fact invented this. And he'd like to somehow clear his conscience and get away with having invented this extremely popular memoir without getting cancelled, I think you'd say today. But he can't figure out how to do it, and so he's tried to involve this journalist into the... But I thought the part I'd read to you is, it's quite central to some of the things I say in the book about the city and the way that the city is interpreted through writing and through novels, and the way that we see the city as a result. Because London is a hugely written about city, and you know, it's almost superfluous to try and write a London novel because so many excellent London novels have been written. But there was still something I wanted to kind of express about the business of writing about London, and that's kind of discussed directly in this scene, which is where the protagonist of the novel, the alcoholic journalist, meets who's called Jack, meets Oliver Pierce, the reclusive novelist, in order to interview him for the first time. The memoir, the as it turns out, fraudulent memoir, is set entirely in this area of Mile End, and indeed quite a lot of it within the cemetery park, which is where the book's climax takes place. But I can't read that part because it's a bit spoilerish, even though it is the main part set within the cemetery park. So this is when they meet. Pierce lived just off of Victorian Garden Square. That's Tredegar Square, incidentally, if you know the area. Tredegar Square, concealed behind Mile End Road, one of those hidden pockets of the East End that could be mistaken for Chelsea or Islington or my own Pimlico. For a nauseating moment, I thought he might have a whole terraced house as his own, but there were two doorbells with Pierce's at the top. I rang, exchanged a couple of crackly words through the intercom, and heard feet on the stairs. I had seen Pierce's picture in the newspaper profiles that had appeared before his seclusion, a round face under a shaved scalp, a combination that verged on the potato-y. But no potato had those eyes, dark and furious, always directed hard at the camera, no soulful chin-stroking or rightly gazing into space, arms crossed like a bouncer, staring you down. Only the photo on the back cover of Mile End Road differed, dark curly hair, retreating a little, glasses, the slightly affronted look of someone caught by surprise, before he had settled on his image. In Night Traffic, that's the book that turns out to be fraudulent, Pierce had speculated as to what made him a target for muggers. He was 5'8", a couple of inches shorter than me, and a little chunky. When he opened the door, though, he seemed to be at least my height and more. The slight doughiness of his frame manifested as pure presence and force. The eyes didn't pin me down or fix on me like a laser or any of those cliches. It was as if he barely noticed me, catching my own gaze once and then breaking away, turning back into the hall. "Jack, yeah? Mr. Pierce, great to meet you at last. Alan's just left. I'm surprised you didn't see him." I was relieved. "Yeah, I'm sorry I'm so late. Close the door, yeah? Just slam it." He was already 3 steps up the stairs, not looking back. Pierce had the top 2 floors of the house, a flat more than twice the size of mine. At once I wondered if he owned or rented, the usual London question. Except that's not the London question, not exactly. The question is, how are you here? How do you make it work? How do you supply what the city demands? More than half my salary went on the rent of my dark little flat, and I dreaded the next increase. I was not making it work. How, then, did Pierce? The secret, shameful side of the London question was the accompanying desire to hear that the answerer was not making it work, that they were drowning in debt or crippled by mortgage payments, or the flat had untreatable toxic mold, or was the site of a recent and savage string of murders. Anything that would make one's own failure sting a little less. The flat was, at first, as you'd expect. I was led into a short corridor lined with knee-high piles of books, magazines, loose papers, and copies of The Guardian and Evening Standard, like my own home. I knew at once what I'd find in the living room, a wall given over to bookshelves, either IKEA or built-in, wedged with books and decorated with some self-conscious sprinkling of postcards, invitations, photographs, and mementos, and so on, much like what's behind me here. Wrong. At least 2 upstairs rooms had been knocked through to form Pierce's living room, which ran all the way from the front of the house to the back, with big windows at each end. This yielded a long side wall that would have been perfect for meters of shelves, but this wall was instead filled with a huge map of London. Map is, in fact, not a useful term to describe what Pierce had made. In the south, Biggin Hill and Purley were at skirting board level. The northern stretch of the M25, where it runs past Waltham Abbey, was at the ceiling cornice. The outer outline of Greater London was just about recognisable, as was the blue vein of the Thames, where it widened in the east, and a few exposed green patches at Richmond, Blackheath, Epping, and elsewhere. The rest of the city was obscured by a thick aggregation of matter, which lifted and shivered when Pierce threw open the door and walked into the room. It was a layer of sticky notes, index cards, and clippings, several layers, from the look of it, anchored by hundreds of coloured thumbtacks. Further notes encrusted the wall to the left and right of the map. The room also contained 4 metal filing cabinets and the usual living space furniture, a 3-piece suite facing a telly at one end of the room, a dining table and chairs at the other. Wow, I said. The map, Pierce said, with a pained expression. I've been meaning to take it down. What? Why? What is it for? He didn't answer, and instead waved an arm in the direction of the cracked brown leather sofa. Sit. Coffee? Tea? Coffee would be great, I said, taking off my coat. I ignored Pierce's instruction to sit and checked out the room instead. I approached the map. The cacophony of information from the wall was overwhelming, and the accumulated ephemera was rarely less than 5 layers deep, obscuring the most recognizable features. I traced the line of the river upstream until I found Pimlico. Notes on the surface included Monster Tavern, Millbank Prison, Australia, and Dolphin Square Sex Ring. These were all scrawled in black and red biro on post-its and snippets of notepaper, some no larger than postage stamps. But beneath them was a much larger note, an index card inscribed with fat black marker pen, obviously one of the first things pinned to the wall when the map was new. To read it, I had to move the other accretions out of the way, revealing the letters one by one. It said, Mistress City. Bick, Pierce said, making me jump. An orange post-it, its adhesive exhausted, floated to the floor. I saw 1 or 2 were already there. Unusual name, as in Bick ballpoints. With a K, I said, realizing that Pierce must know the spelling perfectly well, having seen my name in emails, as in Bicker or Bickle. Ha, Pierce said. Definitely said, not spoken, not a laugh. You talking to me? That's why I'm here. It's a pity it's not Bick like the pens, Pierce said. He spoke with his back to me, busy making coffee in a small kitchen through an arch. That would be a good name for a writer. I'm interested in nominative determinism, the idea that your name has power, that it influences what you choose to do in life. You're, I don't know, Mr. Heel, so you become a doctor. Pierce stopped what he had been doing, pouring milk into a little jug, and frowned over his shoulder at me. Sorry, like our mutual friend, I said. Pierce stopped what he had been doing, pouring milk into a little jug, and frowned over his shoulder at me. FAQ, I said, surprised he needed prompting, given that he's already all over the internet. I'm going to skip past that part because it's not actually that relevant to what we're talking about. I returned to the sofa. Did Alan get any pictures of you with the map? I asked, full of hope. It would make a great opening spread image, Pierce against this conspiracy theorist palimpsest, the city and the surgeon of its dark heart. What a way into the piece. It would write itself. Pierce approached carrying a tray, on which there were 2 steaming mugs, a bowl of sugar and a milk jug. This struck me as a touch genteel, the little white milk jug in particular, which isn't bad as material goes, people acting against type. What would an in-character Oliver Pierce have offered me? supermarket whiskey, a line of speed, a punch to the throat. Mention of the map made Pierce wince again. He settled into an armchair. Yeah, Alan did get a picture. But do you have to talk about the map? Like I say, I've been meaning to get rid of it. I'm sorry, it's hard to ignore. Perhaps if you told me what it was for, and why it's not needed anymore. Wait, hang on. I didn't want to take any chances with this, so I fished the other digital recorder from my bag. Do you mind if I record this? Pierce shook his head, assenting. I turned on the digital recorder and set it on the coffee table between us. 2 DVRs, one on the table, one in my pocket. One would have to work. After I wrote Night Traffic, before that even, I had been lumped in with all that psychogeography lot, Ian Sinclair and Will Self and so on. And I didn't like that. There were so many people doing that shit now. All that fucking Lost Rivers, ghost tube stations, all that shit. I'm just so fucking sick of that. It makes me want to puke. It was getting boring 10 years ago, and it's just intolerable now. And the whole ideological project that goes along with it, all about tracing out the London of the Cray twins and industrial past and a revolt against the corporate takeover of... I mean, I fucking hate what London is becoming, what it has become. I really fucking hate it. This fucking shiny cloakroom for the biggest bastards in the world. But one of the reasons they come here is because of that trendiness, the grit, all that fucking mystique sludge that's dredged up from the Thames 24/7. Did you read my Eels piece with the Russian girls, the oligarchs' daughters, Anastasia and that? They loved all that. They had read Mile End Road. That's why they got in touch with me. Like I was a tour guide. One of them had a copy of Ackroyd's London biography. She had brought it along. The East End, that's what they wanted. The Blind Beggar, Saris, National Front, Jack the Ripper. They wanted all that as much as they wanted Knightsbridge and Chelsea. So what could I do? Trying to get the city back by writing about all that stuff, it was doomed. It's just advertising. It just sucks in more cash. In the end, that's one of the things that motivated me to write Night Traffic, to try and do something that wasn't shabby chic, but terrifying, something... He trailed off, staring into space, in the direction of the window. And then he turned his attention to his coffee, putting in a slug of milk and a lump of sugar from the bowl. I wanted him to complete the quote. It was hard to believe how well the interview was going. I had this great mass of quotable, fiery material up front, but I desperately wanted him to finish the thought. My eyes flicked to the digital recorder on the table, making sure that the red light was lit and the timer was counting upwards. Something real, I supplied? Something true? Do you take yours black? Pierce asked, offering me milk. Anyway, I was trying to think of other strategies. I thought I might try and shut down the psychogeography business in London once and for all. If I could write the ultimate psychogeographical index of London, gathering up and pinning down every mystical wrinkle, every backwoods fact, and every obscure snippet of folklore, a psychopedia of London, I could make the field entirely obsolete all at once. A key to all mythologies, like Casaubon and Middlemarch, and that's the problem, the Casaubon complex. It can't be done. Not that London is somehow special, although it is very big and very old. But it would take a lifetime and it still wouldn't be finished. And what if I did finish it? A 5,000-page, multi-volume slab of what amounts to pub trivia. It would only fuel the fire. It will be on the Zaha Hadid coffee table in every penthouse in Docklands. I'm going to skip a bit here because it's not strictly relevant. The encyclopedia is part of a broader project, if you can call it a project. More of an ambition, he said. The same project, in fact, as Night Traffic. An attempt to discover something about the city. I don't know where that project is going now. I checked the digital recorder, but only out of instinct, watching the seconds climb. So this larger project, I began. Pierce rolled his eyes. You know that stuff they used to put in shower gel? I think they banned it. Those little particles, little grains of plastic. It was always called, I don't know, dermoabrasion microbeads, and I guess people thought it was pumice or pulverized seashells or something, but it wasn't. It was plastic, tiny specks of plastic. All this plastic going straight down the plug hole, into rivers, into the ocean. Fish eating it, seabirds eating it. It was poisoning everything. Those big swirling garbage patches in the oceans, they're not Lucozade bottles and Ninja Turtles. Most of it is this plastic dust that's almost too small to see. But it's choking up everything. Anyway, that's what I think of when I see a lot of writing about London. Synthetic grit. Plastic that makes you feel a little bit better for a moment or two. A little bit invigorated, and then it poisons the world. So that's the reading portion. So that's kind of the heart of the book, or rather Oliver's feelings about psychogeography, the idea that it's meant to be a kind of reaction against the corporatization of the city. It's meant to be this sort of like, hunt for the gritty and the real and the authentic and the down to earth and, the real London. But in fact, the way that it's come out is it's been incorporated into the city's advertising strategy. And so what can you do to write a real story about London? What can you do to write something that's real and authentic? And how can you have a real experience? And that's that's the kind of the question that they grapple with in the course of the book. And the completely insane way they try and come up with it is because they try and solve the problem is because Pierce invented this story about getting mugged. They go out and try and get mugged for real to see if it can be arranged, and to see if that sort of spontaneous urban act, what they consider to be a fairly real urban act, is still sort of possible, whether you can just contrive it, which is a pretty weird and self-indulgent thing to do, but I hope it makes for a dark and entertaining story. I felt that this sort of story of people essentially stumbling around at night in London would, when the lockdown began, I felt that it would not really have very much relevance to the current situation because we'd all be stuck at home and we wouldn't be doing any nocturnal explorations. But in fact, one thing I discovered was that quite counter to my expectations, the lockdown ended up prompting a lot of interest in walking, because walking was what you could do to exercise each day. People started exploring the 1 mile radius around their house like never before. And that was certainly true for me. And it was one of the happy benefits of that was that it was during the lockdown that I really came to appreciate the cemetery park, because I went from just being an occasional visitor going there for the shuffle festival or whatever, or for occasional special treats, to actually walking through it 3 or 4 times a day. And those walks during the lockdown also spoke to another thing that I try and express in Plume, which is this idea of there being multiple cities superimposed over each other. I think we can all remember what an eerie place the city or any of our neighborhoods felt while everyone was confined to their home. It was, there are often times when London feels like a surprisingly empty place. During August and at Christmas, when you walk around, it can feel very, very emptied out. But then it genuinely is emptied out. It's quiet because people aren't around. During the lockdown, it felt quiet even though people were around. So it had this oddly primed kind of atmosphere that was that was interesting. It was empty but full, as it were. It was transformed. And this spoke to me about one of the things I talk about in Plume, which is the way that many different cities coexist. A place can remain physically the same. It can be the same, in terms of the buildings and even the people. But for an individual walking through it, it can be transformed by circumstances. This is, I think, for comfortable middle class people like me, it's often baffling what a terrible and dangerous and threatening place London can be for younger, more vulnerable Londoners who are the victims of postcode violence, where a simple boundary can be the difference between life and death, and yet this might be a boundary that I walk across without even being aware of its existence multiple times a day. That's 2 different cities coexisting. But the way that I explore it in the book is through this concept of, is through fear. The book that Oliver Pierce has fraudulently written, has pretended happened to him, and in fact didn't happen to him, is about being mugged. And the protagonist, the alcoholic journalist Jack, actually has been mugged on more than one occasion, and the stories of how that happened and how it affected him are told during the book. And one thing that it does is it transforms the experience of being mugged or attacked in the street. Is it transforms the urban environment around you. What a mugger will try to do is shut down the space, shut down the sense of space around you, so that you can only focus on them and being robbed. And that has that kind of deeply unpleasant and horrible experience has a lingering effect in the way that you view the city. Having been a victim of street crime, or having been burgled or whatever, familiar places that you know well and trust, and which used to be the happiest places, can be transformed into places that are full of fear, and that's that sort of layering of different effects within the city, where one place means one thing to one person and another is something that I tried to capture in the book. By lingering rather heavily on the questions of street crime and fear, I've made it sound like rather a dark book, and I suppose it is dark, but it is also meant to be quite funny, as these essentially extremely conceited idiots wander around trying to get attacked. The transformation of places through experience, which is really what psychogeography is fundamentally. It's a practice of just thinking about the city through our associations with places, not as a fixed history or text, but looking at it as a great cosmos of personal associations and experiences. One of the wonderful aspects of this horrible situation that we've all been in has been the way it's transformed my view of the cemetery park and how much I've come to appreciate it. Because having given it a very dark press in my book, where it is the locus of this invented crime, and then turns into the locus of a real crime within the story within my novel, it has now become a place that's deeply precious to me, and it's been wonderful to watch it grow and change over the past few months by visiting on a regular basis. And I'm excited that at least one person was moved to visit the cemetery park on the basis of my account of it.